Good morning. I call to order special board meeting of directors for Health and Beauty Irrigation District on Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. Mr. Garai, would you please lead us in the faith?
Lord, we thank you for this day. We ask for your blessing and guidance for all those in attendance here today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Mr. Colquitt, would you please lead us in the pledge of allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Introduction of guests. Madam Secretary, would you please announce the guests online? I will note that there are none present at the district.
Yes, Mr. President, I have Chris Rich, Brenda Gonzalez, J.R. Hennessy, Anthony Cullen, Castle Law Firm, Ms. Clements, Rhett Solopek, and Shelley Randall.
Thank you very much. Our next item on the agenda is the management recruitment process. We have Mr. Chris Polly with us here today. He has been contracted to help us with the recruitment of the next manager for the district. With that, Mr. Polly, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Would you prefer I sit in the center?
I don't actually care. Does the board have a preference?
Or you? If the board is comfortable, I'll stay here then. That's fine. So appreciate the opportunity to come. Met most of you. Those of you I haven't met yet, just some background. Chris Polly. I've been with Health and Beauty Irrigation District since probably 10. When I hung up my shingle in 9. Previous to that, I've been associated with Health and Beauty Irrigation District since 1992, when I worked for the National Water Resources Association. That's where I first met Mr. Gary Esslinger and other members of the board at that time. After working for the National Water Resources Association, I had the great opportunity to go and work for the Bureau of Reclamation. I was the deputy commissioner for then Commissioner Bob Johnson. And then later up, I was the deputy assistant secretary for water and science. Same position that our good friend Mr. Michael Gray currently holds. So after that, hung up my shingle, and Health and Beauty was my third client, which I'm very proud to say that. And so I've been asked today to come and talk to you about recruitment. I've helped people connect many times over the years, managers to irrigation districts and other positions. It was only last year that I actually got paid for it. And that's with the Kennewick Irrigation District. So also a client. And so Kennewick Irrigation District said, well, you know a lot of folks, why don't you act as our headhunter? And so did that with quite some time. So I'd be happy to talk to you about that process. And of course, Health and Beauty has solicited my services to assist with finding your next manager. So one of the things I'd like to hand out, I'll just pass these around maybe. So Kennewick Irrigation District is irrigation district, a little bit smaller than yours. It's about 50,000 acres, but it's in Kennewick, Washington, rapidly urbanizing. So it's a little bit different. They were looking for a manager. This is one of the things that they handed out, and it's basically a description of position plus of the district. And I think it's really slick flyer. Like if you're going to go buy a house, you have a slick flyer, and this is kind of the equivalent of that for an irrigation district manager. So number one, I'd say we need to put something together like this for Health and Beauty. So be aware of that. Also be aware of your benefits packages and what you want to do. So let me just hand this out. So here's a list of all the Kennewick Irrigation District benefit packages. Now, of course, different districts than yours, we folks do what you want, but it's always beneficial to see how other people do, to learn from their experiences. I apologize, gentlemen. Well, like this next copies.
I got excellent, Mr.
Do you? Okay.
Chris, you got, I didn't see it, it's now about that.
So be aware of that. So a couple of things I want you to be aware of is going into this, when you advertise a position like this, now, hiring your manager is probably the most important thing that any board does. Because the district might have many employees, but the board has one employee, that's the manager. Okay? And so that is your most important hire. And so it's important that you get someone that can understand your district, understands irrigation, understands farmers, understands the needs of the farmers, can work well with council, has an idea of what one is, your reclamation. Actually, the general manager of irrigation district is a bit of a misnomer. Managing the irrigation district is actually a very small percentage of what they do. The bigger things that they work on are working with council, working with Bureau of Reclamation, all those other things. And running the water, that's what their people underneath them do. But that person is key. You have to have the exact right person for that position. So some things that I would advise, when you're advertising this, you're going to have a salary range. To be competitive, you need to be in the twos. All right. This is a big job. It's a big responsibility. The person that you're going to hire is working for an irrigation district someplace else or something of similar size. My point is they have a job already. They're a quality person working somewhere else. And so when they decide to come here, it's got to be an attractive thing. And so part of that is you're going to have a contract. Now, about 50% of irrigation district managers have contracts. And that's because the culture of our irrigation districts is just that you hire the person, you know what this till we get done. And there's never been a contract. But I'll point out that the agreement that you folks signed with me was 8 pages long. And I'm just helping you find a manager, 8 pages for that. And so your contract needs to be pretty inclusive. I would refer to council, but the main thing for the contract is that you have arbitration language. You agree to arbitration. That is, if things go south, both parties are going to go in arbitration. And again, I'll defer to council, but from a layman's point of view, arbitration is always going to be quicker and cheaper than regular litigation. So keep in mind, all right? Hiring managers like a marriage, and the contract is your prenup. Okay. So it's important to have.
And more confidential in another aspect of arbitration.
Yes. That's right. That's right. Council have lots of recommendations as to what should go in that contract. And as businessmen, business people, you understand that. All right. During the KID process, their irrigation district had a union component. Most some irrigation districts do, others like EBID don't. But they had a 5-employee panel of the union folks that did interviews. They also had a 5-employee panel of non-union folks that also did interviews. So the day that they interviewed candidates, those candidates had 3 interviews, one with the union folks, the non-union folks, and with the board. The employee interviews were a half-hour long. The board took as long as the board needed. The shortest interview was 30 minutes with the board. The longest interview was 1.5 hours. At the end of the day, we started at 9 o'clock, they ended at 6. At the end of the day, the board asked each of the employees to come in, all 10, and they said, give us your 1 and 2 individually, your top candidate, 1 and 2 and 1. And that was very insightful for the board because it underscored what the board was already having in mind. And so I would advise something like that. It involves your employees, and it gives the board a better insight as to how this person interacts with your rank and file. And that is so key to the success of the district. The other thing is when we did the questions, and I will hand out copies of the questions. We had 2 sets, internal and external. You can understand why. Your external candidates you're going to ask them questions about the district or about their jobs that you're not going to ask the internal candidates, because the internal candidates have been here, they already know. All right, so these are the external. These are the EID process. I highly recommend this. All the board members participate in here. And by participated, every board member asked a question. And we just kept going down the list. Each board member asking a sequential question until we got through the list. With each candidate, we had a fresh set. So that people could take notes. After each interview, we would talk a little bit. She's going to. We talk about those candidates. And then they would rank. Now, has anyone noticed a curveball in that first question? That's right. What makes you angry? It's an odd question, isn't it? What makes you angry? Well, that's a very deliberate question. We ask them about their background, what makes them angry? How that individual answers that question is very exciting. Do they say something flippant? Do they give a thoughtful answer? Do they talk about, how do they answer that question? Because, how many people have military background besides our president? Anybody? Anyone's father? Relatives? Grandfather? Dad? Yeah. All right, well, you might have heard this in the family. The military is very good on teaching critical thinking and never making an emotional decision. That's one thing that military has, especially in officer candidate school. You never make an emotional decision. Because as the emotion raises, rational thought diminishes. And you do not make a good decision when you're angry. All right. And so you want a general manager who's like this, unflappable. Is that easy to do? No, it takes great training, but you want someone as close to that as possible. Because you're giving them the keys to the kingdom, your irrigation district. That is a tremendous responsibility. Each of you are farmers, each of your families are tied to the land, tied to this irrigation district. There's over 700 irrigation districts in the West, but there's only one for you, this one. And so that person that takes that seat has to be even keeled, rational thinking, and as far from anger as possible. So that's why the first question is, what makes you angry? So that gives us some insight as to who that person is. Now, the rest of the questions, you'll be able to read for yourselves. Are designed to give the board maximum amount of information to make your decision. And also a better idea of the person's management style, experience with irrigation, background with managing people. These jobs are unique and different. Hence, the reason for me being a headhunter. You know, we've had irrigation district manager, irrigation district leader magazine since October of 10. This is a Union Mexico issue, which we started about a year or so ago. There's, as I said, only 700 irrigation districts in the West. It's a very small. And when you look at the population of the country and the amount of people are involved in agriculture, the number of people just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so to find that one person that can run this district well, you know, that's going to take the board's involvement to really find the right person. So, you know, look at the questions. Are these the same questions we would use? No. A lot of them might be. There'll be some questions that would be specific to New Mexico law, specific to the EBID's irrigation district and others. But I want you to take a look at those. So, part of the success with the KID process was all the candidates came to me. And as I explained to President Davier, that prevents you from having to weed out people that are just like completely unqualified. Now, we will put an advertisement in the magazine, and that goes to the irrigation districts, and that hits the people you want. We'll also use some other things that you people as business people are aware of, Indeed and so forth. That'll attract lots of folks. And you can put in all your descriptions and all your barriers in Indeed and other things, but you're still gonna get a few people that apply that, just won't work for what it needs. My job will be to weed out the obvious ones. And then I need to have preferably one person on the board that I go to. And then there's President Davier or his designee, your designee. Here is a list of candidates come through. What do you think about this or that? And then together we weed those down. Now, the other person that's got to be involved in this process is Mr. Gary Esler. And that is because he is your manager right now and knows far more about this district than I do. All these candidates, chances are they're going to know who he is. Chances are they're going to apply for this because they know Gary, they've known him for many years. They're going to pick up the phone and call him. The ones that don't know him should pick up the phone and call him. And I will encourage all the candidates to have a conversation with the manager. They need to have lots of conversations because you want your candidate to come in eyes wide open. The other thing is, if it's someone that's not local, someone's out of state, they need to step foot on EBID. They need to tour. And who better to tour them around than you? Now, they might be from an irrigation district in Idaho or Washington State or Nebraska or someplace like that, and very confident. But irrigation here is different. Irrigation is very regional, and even within the states it's different. Your water supply, your issues, very different. Years ago, I said to Gary, I said, so what percent of your budget do you use on aquatic herbicides? He's like, well, we don't use any. You're like, well, that's fine. Well, it's because your water is chocolate milk. You don't have any. You don't have any use aquatic, use herbicides on your banks and so forth. But your water is totally different. Totally different. Washington State, 20% of their budget goes into aquatic herbicides, millions of dollars in aquatic herbicides. Because that water coming out of the Columbia is crystal, just absolutely crystal. And the weed growth is exponential. We have to treat it every 2 weeks. And if they don't treat it every 2 weeks, it makes it choked up quickly. Because those long days of sunshine and so forth, just exponentially grow. Very good. All right, let me get back to the agenda here. You have your questions. You see the benefits. You need to have, we need to have a chain of command as far as who I work with on the board. And an understanding that the candidates are going to be talking to Mr. Essinger and getting toured away. Right. Now, the other thing I want to talk to you about is time frame. It's February. Water's going to start running in most districts next month. And so we're at the beginning of a water season. That's a difficult time to start looking for somebody. And with the expectation of hiring someone soon. It's a good time to start putting out feelers that people can be thinking about. Are you going to get an irrigation district manager that's going to jump ship mid-season? Probably not. Because they've probably been wherever they are, they've been there for many years, they're highly respected, they have a relationship with their board. And unless things are really bad, they are not going to leave their people in the lurch. So now you might get some assistant managers and so forth and fine, there might be really quality folks. But I think that you want the right person, right? You want the right person. And so I wouldn't put any arbitrary timeframes, like we have to have someone next month. I would put this out a ways. And with KID, they started about this time of year. And they said, we want to start interviewing in September. And we want to have all our ducks in a row, all our candidates in like early August. And that's what we want. And so once they chose, here are our 5 candidates, then they set up the interview a month later. So they're going to have time to get their lives in order. Yeah, to possibly tour the district and that type of thing. Now, again, these are suggestions. I'm just describing what KID did. You are your own thing, your own entity. You can decide what you want to do. But with KID, we had success with that. And I would strongly suggest doing something like that to increase your chances of success. Let me just pause there. President Davier, questions? What am I doing again?
No, that's good. So also with the case study of KID, note that from selection to their start date was approximately 4 months. So there's a transition period from once you've selected a candidate for, again, assuming that they're managing a district currently from their departure timeframe for their current district. And then, time to get them moved and in place for our district. I am also hopeful that we will be able to continue our relationship with Mr. Esslinger, and that Mr. Esslinger will be able to continue working with the new manager for some period of time, to help them understand both the district and the current operational structure of our employees. Questions from the board?
Well, one other point I didn't make, these questions is, in that process with the county, they started at 9 o'clock and they went all the way to 6, full day there. And then they voted. Now, there was one member that was going to abstain. And so when I said to the manager, I said, do you want to talk about the importance of a unanimous vote at the board level? That's all I said, unanimous vote. And so then they got the board to talking, and then that gentleman voted with the rest of the group. Now, the importance of a unanimous decision is that tells your candidate, and most importantly, your staff and your farmers, this is our individual. We fully support this individual. If you vote someone in on a split vote, that sends a mixed message, like some of us like this person, some of us don't. And that handicaps the district moving forward. And so be aware of that. Now, that doesn't tie your hands from future board meetings or anything like that. Things go south, you can make an adjustment. But starting out, it's important to have a very unified vote, united front behind that individual. Yes, sir.
What was the basis for that one member wanting to abstain?
A personal relationship with one of the candidates. Yeah, and kudos to that individual. It was a very tough thing to do. But he put his board, his district ahead of himself, his friendship, and his own operation.
And so for some history, in the last selection process, the board made a decision that when we got to deliberating candidates, that we were not going to stop when we got to 5-4 on candidates. We continued to discuss, we continued to deliberate. We did not require us to get to a unanimous decision in our internal discussion. But we decided that 5-4 was an insufficient standard. We wanted something that was more compelling, that the board had thought this through and that we were behind a candidate. And then we voted 9-0 to hire that individual. And the decision there was, we all went into this understanding that as a board, we are taking all of our experiences and trying to make the best decision. We will not all think exactly the same, but we understood going in that as a board, we are making this selection, not as individuals. And so that was the reason we did that, and I appreciate Mr. Paul bringing that up. But we thought it was an important in understanding our role. The board selects the manager. I don't. The board does. I am part of the board, but once the board makes a decision on this, I am part of the whole, and ensuring that we're communicating that.
Well said. Yeah, you also had a policy that if they had someone internal that wanted to apply, they got to interview. If they wanted to interview, they got to interview. That was wise because you want to support your people, you want your people to stay. It also gave the board an opportunity to see the individuals that wanted to become manager. It gave the board an opportunity to get to better know that person. Now, ultimately, they didn't choose someone inside, but I can tell you this, every internal candidate that interviewed with that board rose in status significantly. And many of those conversations were like, wow, this individual has really grown, not this time, but next time, next year. And from the individual's point of view, they felt respected, included, and part of the process. If they were just like, no, then they're like, why am I here? You know, maybe I should look somewhere else. I think they've lost some really quality individuals. But, their policy was if someone internal wants to, apply. they need to do it.
Mr. Robert Russell.
Mr. President, Mr. Pauly, can you please discuss a little bit more on what you think are the most important qualities for an ideal candidate based on what you have written here?
Well, experience is just top notch. I can't underscore that. You need someone that's got experience right in their irrigation district. It is such a unique and different job. Now, does that mean that a successful candidate has to be an irrigation district manager? No, I'll reference KID again. The manager that we helped replace, Mr. Chuck Freeman, actually was a city manager, a municipal city manager. Now, Kennewick at that time, and they would be the first to share this, they had a real mess in their hands. They had 5 active lawsuits. They had lots of internal problems. And they needed someone that could come in and just fix things. And that's what Mr. Freeman did. He came in, he's a very no-nonsense guy. And he put policies in place. And in 3 years' time, he got all their litigations resolved and settled. And, there's probably going to be a statue in the parking lot to that guy if he leaves. That's what a good job he did. Now, there's also going to be a bit of an overlap there. But that is, Mr. Freeman is the exception, not the rule. Generally, irrigation districts, you have someone that's worked in irrigation district at some level and, rose through the ranks or came from one district to another. And that's generally how things have worked. Now, these are good jobs. Now, Gary's been in his position for many, many years. That is the rule. Irrigation districts are long served by individuals. It's not, we'll do it for a couple of years. It's a lifetime commitment in many respects. And I've had managers we've had on the cover of the magazine that have retired after 40, 50 years. 50 years as manager. And then the man leaves and like, now what do we do? It's a big problem. So to answer your question a bit more, top qualities are experience, but also experience in managing people. All right. Now, you can have a background in like the military or something like that and have been in command of folks. Hey, that's great. Running a company, that's good too. Municipality, you bet. But if they have experience in water law, have an understanding of that, that's helpful. An understanding, an ag background, I think that's key. Farming is such a unique thing. Challenging. It's important to have, be able to speak to farmers, to have an understanding of what their background is and what they're coming from. There's fewer and fewer of us that are growing up on a farm. I'm 5th generation from Nebraska. And you might say, why am I working time in doing this? Well, you'll appreciate this. I had an older brother that wanted to farm, and so that freed me of the obligation. So I went to DC, worked for a member of Congress, met a girl, married her, and stuff. Been out there 34 years. 34 years. Farm's still active. We irrigate. All right. So your top qualities: experience, management experience in people. All right. Those are your 2 top things: irrigation district experience, management of people. Start there. Yes, sir.
So with Kennewick, at the final interview, they had 5 candidates. Of those 5, how many were internal?
2.
2 and 3 were external.
Yeah. And they thought there'd be more. But for whatever reasons, there wasn't.
And so they would, if they had 5 internal guys want to apply, they would interview all 5 of them.
Absolutely. As a show of respect. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, was that a long day? Yes, it was. That was a very long day. And, the board did a tremendous job and, everyone stuck to it. I was there during all the interviews. Not with the employee interviews, but with all the board interviews. And you might think, well, why is that? Well, because I was there to answer any questions. Did I ask any questions? Absolutely not. I was there as a resource to the board. Because afterwards they might say, ask me a question about that individual's background, that type of thing. Or I did the introductions, or just that type of thing. So they wanted me there throughout the entire process. And I think I did a good job helping them. I think that's reminding them of the importance of the unanimous decision, I think helps set up their current manager for success. Just those little things make all the difference.
Other questions from the board? One of the most important parts of today's discussion is defining the role of the manager or the job description. We're not defining the person we're looking for, we're defining the role that they will fill when we select them. Mr. Esslinger's role is extraordinarily diverse. And there are many things that have been laid at his feet over 4 decades that he's been with the district. It is my opinion that we need to provide good separation in that and decide what it is that we would like the manager of the district's role to look like. I'm going to open it with just the simple idea that there's the internal management of the district, there's the external management of the district. There are the things that our members see day in and day out. There are the things that occur outside of our district that they may not be aware of, that may not impact their operation tomorrow, but which will substantially impact their operation in the years and decades to come. I think it would be good to separate the manager's role in one of those 2 directions. And that the person that does the other part of the task works for the general manager. That's a very broad, high-level view of it. That's my opinion, but we should define what that is so that when Mr. Pauly is doing his search, he knows what type of candidate he's looking for. What is it that you all see as the role of the manager moving forward? Mr. Sloan?
I would kind of, as far as Kennewick, what were they looking at? I mean, were they looking at more, I mean, I don't know how our district's equity left, but were they looking at more a person that was gonna be handling, government affairs, going to DC, that level, or were they looking at more of a guy that's gonna handle the operations side of the, I mean, I know generally maybe to do both and all of it, but what was there more, the emphasis?
It's a very good question, because Kennewick had that history of going outside the box. They were open to a variety of folks. In fact, that was my instruction was, they weren't looking for any one kind of person. So we had someone that focused on government relations. We actually had a returned colonel from the Army. We had a manager from the irrigation district who they later hired. We had a guy from one of the local municipalities that applied. They have a couple capital projects that they're trying to build, a reservoir. They did a title transfer, just like EBID did. EBID was one of the first ones to do title transfer. They recently did a title transfer. There's part 2 to a title transfer. So it's a bifurcated responsibility of capital improvements and the government relations of dealing with the Bureau of Reclamation and the congressional delegation moving forward. And then you throw on top of that all the urbanization issues. So ultimately what they hired was a gentleman from Arizona who had done all those things and dealt with urbanization issues. Now, Arizona and Washington State are not even on the same planet as far as water and irrigation. But that's what they were, was someone that had the government relations, plus they can drive capital projects built.
Greg, one of the things I think would help in this situation, I know we're looking at external versus internal, how much time should he? I think we need a dynamic person who can do both. I don't know what the rest of the board, because they're new, but one of the things that I would ask, and I want to ask today, I really would have told Gary Esslinger and said, Mr. Esslinger, you've been running this ship a long time. You know the employees, you know our state legislation. You are a person of all people in the room that probably understands best what a new manager could do to help the whole district, not just one part of it. And what I haven't heard today is what do you think, Gary, about the quality of people that should come on? Because I really feel that ought to be at. I know you're wanting to put this on these people here in the room for their intentions down the road, but they haven't been on this board very long, and they're sitting here in their mind asking some really powerful questions. Like, I appreciate that question because it was really good. Should he spend more time outside or inside? And I think the answer is wherever the biggest need is. And how are we gonna find that out? Ask somebody that's been walking down that road for a long time. So I don't wanna overstep anybody's place here, but I'd sure like to hear from Gary what he thinks the new manager's biggest challenges will be, because he knows the employees. He knows our politics. He knows with this big turn of the board, it's a completely new board. There's a lot of things out here that we're dealing with that most boards never have to deal with, guys. So how does that best make for a new manager coming in here? He's coming into a place, Chris, that I don't think any manager's ever faced in his life. How can he best be helped to be successful? And I think a lot of that comes from someone who's been steering the boat. And that's my opinion, guys. Now, I'm not gonna say a whole lot very much in these meetings, but I think that needs to be talked about here today.
Thank you, Mr. Lack. And so I agree that Gary's input in this process is vital. That said, before Gary's opinion is stated and becomes your own, I was hoping to hear your untarnished opinions or unaltered opinions. That said, what would the board prefer? Would you prefer to hear from Gary first, or do you have some more insights that you'd like to provide before that? Mr. Glacial?
One of the things I've learned over the years is there's a lot of things that are unforeseeable that come along. And so whatever we expect of him, I think it has to be dynamic. It's gonna change over years. And, I'm not sure how you write that into a contract or express that to an individual, but it has to be somebody who's adaptable to whatever circumstances come along. Circumstances that EBID is in right now, nobody saw this 5 or 10 years ago, but here we are. And, so there'll be a lot of changes that we're not able to foresee right now. It has to be somebody who's flexible enough and adaptable enough to deal with changes that come along.
Thank you, Mr. Glacial.
We have every board member kind of just do 30 seconds.
I would be very happy with that. So without dissent, I'll just go around the room. Mr. Garai.
I believe we need a manager who gets out and meets all the constituents, not just the board members. Visit, north, central, south, learn, not just the meetings that we have, before irrigation season. I mean, to get out there and show his presence, talk to people. Hear input from them, not just from us, and see it firsthand. Very important. That all the employees, farmers, it's just everybody get along and like the person that we're gonna put in that place. Gary's very good at that, and we need your help with that here.
Yeah, I think we need another Gary, basically. Somebody like him with his knowledge, that's kind of my input.
Mr. Sloan?
You skip yourself or you were thinking?
Yeah, I'll skip myself. I'm intending to take notes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to process it basically, in my opinion, of what candidate exactly you're gonna look for. And I think we're gonna lean on Chris a lot, trying to figure that out. But basically, I'm a little bit undecided of exactly what candidate, at least for myself, what we need. Because like in fairness to Gary, you've been here so long and things have changed that probably originally what you were doing, what you're doing now, it's probably a different thing. It's not the same thing. So going forward for the next 10 or 15 years, trying to think of what exactly the person needs to be doing.
Mr. Rosa.
Mr. President, I believe that we need somebody that, if I were to describe the ideal, career path that this person took and some of the characteristics that I would hope this person had, I would hope that they, would come up through, operations and management and that they were gregarious and, yeah, I'm gonna read a little bit from the ideal candidate sheet that, Mr. Pauly gave us. Be articulate, credible, trustworthy, flexible, decisive, friendly, diplomatic, collaborative, charismatic, and not afraid to ask questions, has a strong commitment to public service and community, and possesses the ability to develop strong, positive relationships with the district's partners at the state, local, regionals, and federal levels. And, often people that come up through management aren't necessarily that, but this is a government role effectively. And, those characteristics are extremely important. So, I think the experience managing people and understanding operations is a good place to start. But, they have to have the ability to do the relationship management that I think makes up a large portion of, the work in the district.
Thank you, Mr. Rovirosa. Mr. Claypool, I think you said something very clear already. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, one more thing you gotta keep in mind is, we're looking for somebody who's worked their way up. When he gets here, we don't want him to keep working his way up and go somewhere else. We want him to stay. That's, that's kind of tricky. I mean, he's gotta have enough confidence that he got where he's at, but not so much he wants to leave us.
Thank you, Mr. Claypool. Mr. Colquitt.
I would like to see a manager who is more boots on the ground and has a solid understanding of day-to-day operations. Then if time permits, manager. Basically, a manager in any organization should be present daily, like Randy said, north, center, south. I'd like someone to be financially driven, but at the same time, good with employees and good to employees. Truthfully, we can hire someone to travel to DC. I think our manager should be present, more of a local presence. And truthfully, I think we should keep it simple, very simple. Before we start taking on national issues and traveling all over the country, I'd like to see EBID get under control. And a well-paid and a happy manager, I think, will stay. Money drives people. And I think a well-paid, non-hostile environment will help us keep them.
Thank you, Mr.
Or her, or them, whatever.
Thank you, Mr. Colquitt. Mr. Ludwig.
Yeah, a couple of things that I was thinking about. The manager should be out there, like, kind of like what PK was talking about, amongst the projects and the employees of the district. They need to know their manager and be able to come to him. He's not just somebody in the office and cruises. He comes out to where we're working, sees what's happening. Another thing he needs, John brought up, was a lot of times, and we all know it, as you run your own farms, you may have all kinds of things planned for today or this week, whatever, but things happen. You gotta change those plans and prioritize what you're doing and changing things you didn't have planned, but you gotta be able to react and solve these problems. And I think these are things the manager needs.
Thank you, Mr. Ludwig. Appreciate all the feedback, appreciate the suggestions from Slide. Go get everyone's thoughts on it. I've thought about this considerably over the last couple of years. And I think Mr. Colquitt, Mr. Ludwig identified one of the roles. The person that's in the district actively managing the people that work for the district, the projects that are going on in the district, operations. And then there's another role, there's all the things outside of the district. And I have been uncertain which of those roles is the district manager? What my general thought is that one of them is a district manager and the other one is a senior staff person that reports to the district manager. In seeing other district managers at the conferences that I have attended, I tend to see them much like Garrett. To Mr. Tharp's comment that we need another Garrett. That they tend to be an amalgamation of both, that they're given the responsibilities of both. As the board of directors, we have one individual that should be reporting to us, the manager. We have lots of people that present to us, that is not reporting to us. And so in that, it is easy for the board of directors to want to assign many roles to that manager because it then gives us direct access to those tasks, those roles and those responsibilities. It's my opinion that they should be segregated. Where I stand today, my opinion is the other side of Mr. Colquitt's. That the person who should be the district manager should probably be the person that is handling our external concerns. They're the face of the district, so external concerns would include things like press. External concerns would include agency contacts, attendance at lobbying efforts, things of that nature. To Mr. Garai's point, the person who's the face of the district should be well known to the members of our district. We do need somebody who is in the district all the time, seeing the projects, interacting with the staff members that have a shovel in their hand. My thought today is that individual, that operations director, would be a staff member of the general manager. I also recognize, you know, my viewpoint is one of many. The other thing I took away is I think that we are still describing the person. Someone who can adapt to unforeseen changes, that's not really a role. That's a description of a person, and I think it is a valuable description of a person. It's somebody that we probably should be looking for as an ideal candidate. But I think what we need to provide for Mr. Pauly is a description of the role, and which way it is the board wants to go. What is that role? Not yet, what's the ideal person to fill that role? With that, I turn it back over to the board for additional discussion. Mr. Roby Rosa.
Mr. President, I oversee in my personal business, a farm, a shelling plant, and a greenhouse. And when I choose how to spend my time, part of that is certainly walking the operation and talking to my managers and having strategy meetings and giving them direction, that sort of thing. And recently, a large part of my time has been doing things that affect the greater farming community. And I would not put one of my managers to do that. I would rather take that responsibility myself. And by that, I mean working with EBID. And whenever you know, the person that can see the longest term, biggest picture strategy, I think should be the person in charge. And a lot of organizing those big picture strategies happens not necessarily at the operations level. And I think for that reason, the person that's the manager should deal more with should be the one responsible for dealing with external issues. And should also be responsible for setting strategy within the district and delegating that strategy or delegating the execution of that strategy to the operation managers.
Thank you, Mr. Roby Rosa. Other comments, Mr. Lack?
I sure want to echo what Ralph has said. They're our greatest value. It's not our natural resources. It's not the goal we have to make. It's our people resource. And people who can manage people, who have people skills, those are the ones who can extend whatever their mission is past themselves. You'll never be able to do more than do yourself if you don't pass it on to people around you, Ralph, whether it be the people right under you or under them. There's that synergy that happens when people get together and they have a common mission and vision and they take that forward. And there's nothing stronger than a leader who is able to convey to those people that works under him exactly that mission and that vision that they need to accomplish. And the more you can do that effectively, the greater you will be solving problems. The more problems you solve, the more you're gonna be in demand. And it's that simple. We really need that person that has that ability to do that. And I'll echo what Chris Paul said. That was very big, a part of his presentation is to have that dynamic person that understands that. And I think people skills are right up there in the very top of someone that you need to hire when you look at those candidates. And you can kind of feel that when they do their interview. Are they a people person? Can they communicate? Do they like people? You know, I've been around a lot of very effective workers that didn't like anybody. But I wouldn't want that person going and showing another person how to even cultivate it, much less irrigate. Your people resources are the best.
Thank you, Mr. Lott. Mr. Sloan.
I do think, like with Kennewick, obviously they hired a prior, irrigation manager from another district. I do think if we can find such a folk like that, that will probably make our life easier as a board. Do you take a guy that's has no experience on certain issues we have? You know, not saying it won't work still, but it might be a little bit more of a challenge. If we can find somebody that, has some already 10, 15 so plus years experience, that might really benefit us getting going fast. So.
Mr. Clay, did you say they hired a former city manager? They're correct or not?
Kennewick initially, they hired a former city manager, and he'd been doing that for many, many years. And then he served at Kennewick for probably about 10 years, quite successful in their turnaround, 100%. And then they hired a manager from Roosevelt Water Conservation District in the Phoenix area, Chandler.
Okay, thank you.
And so they have a, you know, qualifying irrigation district manager.
And John, I've got to meet this guy Chuck, that was the Kennewick's past manager. I was very impressed with him as far as, you know, obviously he's retiring, but, you know, he was probably a pretty special guy to fit that role, you know, coming from the outside, not having any irrigation district experience, but you know, he was pretty, probably a special guy for that role, which, I mean, I hope we can find somebody like
You got
that.
him at the workshop, sir.
Right, yeah, right.
For speakers. So it always boils down to the individual. That's good.
Other comments? Mr. Roby Rosa.
Mr. President, I would add that somebody that came up through operations is always going to highly value and prioritize operations.
I would agree. And it's not something to be lost either. Operations is a very important aspect of the district to our members. Which is why I went back and forth on which way this should go. I will tell you quite frankly, that 2 years ago, I thought the opposite that I do now. I thought that the district manager should be the operational person and that the government affairs individual should be a staff member. Well, my opinion is different today.
Why? What happened? What did you see that brought you to this new, or not new, but your revelation?
It has to do with the evolution of the board's vision for the future for the district. How are we going to be relevant to our members, vital to our members? How are we going to improve our ability to serve them in an uncertain future? And so understanding how the external components that impact our district, understanding how important those are to not the water this year, but the water 10 years from now, led me to believe that that individual and their vision, and that role is more important, for us as governors than how are we going to run water this month, which should be a very on the ground, the operations manager should be pursuing. As governors, I think that our role is more long-term than, we obviously have a role this year. We have to determine, what we're gonna allot for water, when it's gonna be released. Those are decisions we have to face in their immediacy to us. But I think our role is bigger than that. I think our role is to, project further out in the future and to provide a strong foundation for, the governors that succeed us to build upon. And in that, I think the individual that we work directly with should also be focused in that manner. And the critiques that I've ever heard about Mr. Esslinger all deal with how much time he spends doing things that aren't maintaining the canal, delivering the water. Those are the critiques. Why is he doing all these other things? And as a citizen, oftentimes, what's the most important thing? I need my toilet flushed and my trash picked up, and then leave me alone. And to our members, I need the water delivered when I ordered it, and then leave me alone. And that is important for us to understand. To be able to do that, we need to have more vision than just who showed up to work to drive the truck today.
Yeah, Greg, I'm gonna say
Mr.
something
Lack.
for you, and I'm not trying to cut you off,
Please.
but there's two things that you've done since you've been on this board that I think would answer his question for me if I was asking it. One is experience, and the other is that it defines effectiveness. As you experience things that you didn't know, you modify your behavior or your plan of action to fit what best delivers water and what best makes things. And as we come on these boards like y'all did, we was there a few years ago, there's a lot of things we didn't know. There's a lot of things we assumed. But as we get that experience, then we become effective in what we do and the way our plan is to go out there and address the problem. And he's done that well. So, for credit for him, his experience that drove it, but also his effectiveness. He wanted to do a better job, and he kept that in mind. And experience will always be the best teacher. Sometimes a lesson comes before, out of order. A lot of times we learned a lesson, but we didn't get to practice the book to find out what we should have said or done. But I'll say that for Greg. He's really been a good study, and he's worked hard at it.
Thank you, Mr. Lack. And so I appreciate him cutting me short too. I tend to talk a little too long, Mr. Glacial.
Yeah, there's two parts kind of to that. What you're saying, you want water today, and do you want water in the future?
Yes, that's an excellent way to put it. And I have found in my role that focusing on the water today, leaves the water in the future to chance. And I would like to, guide it a little more than just chance.
It's obvious to me, we're gonna be fighting legally the rest of my life. We got too many people with a shovel that want our water, and we're gonna have to defend it. We got some who have already taken our water, we're gonna have to go after it.
Water is the limiting resource in the desert.
But to that, John, then, that's where I'll be honest, I was kind of thinking more like you guys, a little bit more of a, operation kind of guy. But then when you make the comment like that, then I kind of makes my mind change and go, well, you need a guy that's very well versed in
Both sides.
right, but if a guy leans on one side more than the other, I'm gonna probably lean more to maybe what Raphael's saying or even what Greg's saying as far as, versus the guy in the boots on the ground. You know what I mean? So I think about you guys as farms, when you're thinking about whether you want to put personal property or a piece of equipment, you may have your manager may input somewhat, but you're ultimately the owner is gonna make the decision if you want to expand or not. And so you kind of think maybe the same sense with the manager, some of these different operations, they're not that they're not important. Just what's the, if we don't have a bulldozer, yeah, we need it, but it's not gonna make or break us, you know what I mean? So.
Like they say, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting.
Appreciate the discussion. I think with that, it's probably the appropriate time to turn to Mr. Esslinger and ask for his comments on our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all for your comments. Many of you might not know, but I grew up on a farm. And that helped tremendously, not knowing that my future would be with EBID. I'd be out there and I'd watch my dad, and we'd sit around the table with the field foreman, and he'd plan the day, we'd go outside, the tractor would start. So I know what you're saying. You had to change. All of a sudden, what do you do with the man that's supposed to be on the tractor, you know? So I saw my dad react to those kind of changes. Also, there's advantage to go to the Farm Bureau meetings that they used to have, and it was a potluck. So I knew all the kids, I grew up with a lot of you guys and the dads, your dads. And so that did resonate at the time. I left the farm when I was 18, got a job in Idaho, working for the Forest Service, on a team of fighting fires. And so I learned about how a team had to work together. You depended on the other guy. I never was in the military, but I knew that if I was on a fire, I had to watch my back and watch my partner. So I learned that. Over time, I went to school in northern Arizona, had a forest degree. But the job was so good in the summer, working for the Forest Service, the money was good, that I chose not to go to a forestry school and finish my degree in forestry. So I switched to business, got my business degree. I met a man in Idaho where I worked. He had offered me a job right out of college. I went to work as an office manager for a large milling company in East LA, bringing wheat from all over the country, milling it, turning it into flour. So I learned a lot about the business world, but I also had a connection to the farmers growing the wheat. And so that natural resource in forestry, the natural resource on the farm, and the natural resource of working for a milling company in East LA was an experience. So when my dad was getting up in age, he asked me to come back and look at maybe running the farm. His health wasn't good. And I put the pencil to it and realized that it would be a big debt to undertake. And at the time, my dad was leasing it to farmers in this valley, farmers that were on his board. So what really happened was I was waiting for a job with BLM. And it popped up in the newspaper, EBID, taking over from the federal government hiring. I said, EBID, what? I didn't have a clue, but I needed a job, I needed to eat, so I applied. The manager's position was already filled, so I said, well, I'll be a ditch rider if you need a ditch rider. I know how to run water. They said, you're overqualified. And I says, well, I need to eat. So the 2 weeks passed, they called me in and said, we need an inventory clerk. And that's how I started in 1978. Just sitting out in the warehouse, taking the inventory of the Bureau of Reclamation equipment that was coming over and the equipment that the district was had in the warehouse. And I learned a little bit about what the bureaus were doing. I knew the ditch riders because I knew them from the farm, Tucci Hoagie, and all these kind of guys. They were still working for the district. And many of those reclamation people left, but there was a huge battle going on between the feds, thinking that the farmers in this valley couldn't take over the Rio Grande project, here at EBID. And I had to deal with that, and it was a little intense, but I had to deal with those people that were angry that they were losing their job. And I had to deal with people that were brand new coming into this job. And so over time, they realized that they needed a purchasing agent. So within about a year, I became a purchasing agent for the district. I learned really what this EBID was all about, because I was buying desks, computers, and B7 cats. And I had to use those people that had the knowledge that were working for me to understand what do you want? A D7 cat, D6, why? So they taught me. So I started learning a little bit about equipment. Then I started learning a little bit about computers and because we needed those. And back then, it was like big frame housed computers. There was no laptop, there was no desktops. But it still gave me an opportunity to understand that what we were doing by paper, on paper was changing. It was going to a more digital computer age. I had a little bit of that training in college, but certainly I could see the technology changing. I then went from purchasing agent to maintenance chief. And that's when I was out in the field. Farmers would call, board members would call. They said, we need to fix this, we need that, we need this. Johnson grass was 5 foot tall, no weed control. Just mowers that they hired outside contractors to mow the canals. A mess when the transfer took. But the board that was there, instructed me to do certain things. Go buy an excavator, go buy a mowing machine, go buy a tractor. And I'm going, okay. I had to learn procurement. So I said, you just can't go buy it. There's rules. So I went to procurement school. I learned all of that as a maintenance chief and purchasing agent to understand what you have to do to function as a quasi municipal, public entity. From there, I did that for 3 years, got to know a lot of the farmers in the valley because I was out in there with them. They would show me their problem, I would deal with it, get with operations people, understand we need to get water through there, we need to clean a ditch, not necessarily mow it, but dig it out, whatever that issue was. From there, we were, in that period of time, within 4 or 5 years, we were in 2 major lawsuits. The board was fighting El Paso, who was in here trying to pump water out of this district into downtown El Paso. Highly engaged. The board hired a law firm called EBID and Hernandez, and they had 5 attorneys that worked for them. Hubert and Hernandez stayed pretty much on the El Paso case, and the manager was in court every day. Right over here, the hearing was here in New Mexico State at the NMDA conference room. I never saw him. So he called me and said, Gary, meet me over at Ramada Inn on South Main. Back then it was Buddy Ritter's place. And I would give him updates of what happened during the day in operations and maintenance. And when I took over and when I came to work with EBID, those were the 2 main functions, operations and maintenance. Clearly, that was the goal. Clean this place up, get it running again. The Bureau had kind of let it fall apart. Operations and maintenance was key. We had an engineering department, but it was mostly Bureau engineers still working in the front office over here. And over time, I began going to them and asking them, well, we need certain things done, designs, whatever. So from that morphed the engineering department, our own internal engineering department. Many of those people that were working for the district had skills that I didn't know. One of them was a water, he was taking water orders. But when we looked to open up the engineering department, we found out he was going to school for engineering. So yeah, I naturally brought some of the employees and put them over into areas where I thought I could use them and learn from them. And that took a while. And during that period of time, we were also dealing with the Bureau with an operating agreement. We were dealing with pushing the Bureau further out so that the district could take more control of what the Bureau was doing before. They'd run it for 60, 70 years before. So there was a transition. I began working with EP #1, with their manager, just because I needed to talk to him. We were moving water through our canals at Mesilla Dam that were ultimately getting into Texas through our canal system, and the diversion was in New Mexico. I had to understand that. So I had to meet with those guys. I had to meet with the Bureau. the Bureau was very knowledgeable because their actual main office was in El Paso. It wasn't in Albuquerque. And so the El Paso field office became, a place where I go all the time because they ran it for 60 years. I needed to understand things that they did. Maybe I had different ideas, but I had to understand that. So that began my first opportunities to meet with other people outside the district. The farmers. And as time went on and this case continued till 1992, Bill Sad, the manager, I said, Gary, I need your help more than you just being in the maintenance department. So he appointed me, assistant manager. And that was, about 1985. After being here for about 7 years. And during that period of time, I began dealing more with all of the departments. And there was, by that time, engineering, operation, maintenance were the big three. And then, of course, finance and admin office. But things started happening in the world, in the board. At that time, when I became assistant manager, they started inviting me to go with them. Nobody told me to go. I went with board members to NWRA. And they taught me how to deal with senators and Congress. I was like a young man, and I was awestruck that a board member farmer in this valley could walk up and get his picture taken with Pete Domenici, Joe Skeen. They wanted to see that farmer. It wasn't like they wanted to see me, they wanted to see the farmer. And there's many photos I have of me standing with those kind of people, with the farmer next to the senator. So I got the national idea of how important these senators of New Mexico that were now senators of Congress appreciated the farmers in the valley. They were highly respected. And it opened my eyes to understanding that there's another world besides EBID in the daily functions. So my job then was to come back and try to find good staff that would handle the situations that I had to deal with on a daily basis internally. And I managed and brought people up from within that I saw that they would be good at leading people and knew what they were doing with the equipment. They knew how to construct. We had people that worked for Burn Construction with years of experience. Those are the guys I picked as my maintenance foremen. Then they go out and they knew how to run equipment. They built dams back then, built a dam near Randy's house, rebuilt it. EBID built the dam with our equipment and stuff. Very proud of the fact that it still stands. But the point is I learned from within that there's great talent within this organization. And that same talent that I learned and work with, it's here today. I'm telling you, you've got great talent within EBID. So what I did is realize that as El Paso was testing our and challenging us, and so was the state of New Mexico as to deliveries of what would come to Elephant View and what was to be delivered to Texas and New Mexico. I realized that we were doing it all with paper. But going to these conferences like Family Farm, I started with Family Farm in I think 93. Going there, you start to talk to irrigation managers, and there's already using technology, meters and monitoring and real-time data. And I'm going, what are you talking about? Lo and behold, I'll come back. I've got a man here that's talented in knowing exactly what it's going to school for that. So we began then developing a way to meter and monitor way before anybody else in the state was doing it. And it's to this day that we have this kind of data and that we can just instantaneously, we don't have to model anything. It is actually given to us in real time. The water that's released, we know where it is every time, every moment. So that developed into my hydrology department. And so we started using them. And it was like, I think James said, and maybe even John said it. You have to react to what happens at that period of time in your life and make those decisions for the district. And so when we saw the pressure of people wanting to know what was coming in and we need to make sure we knew out, that's when I formed the hydrology department. Another department that was formed out of need was groundwater. Since 2000 and 2003, 2023, 2003, we've been in a drought. Farmers were pumping, cities were pumping, mutual domestics were pumping, everybody's pumping. And yet I needed to understand what was going on underneath. I could go up to the dam and see it empty. It didn't take it long to figure out that the wrinkles on the elephant's butt, you could see them. So I needed somebody to tell me what's happening underground. So we developed groundwater monitor systems, wells, piezometers, different levels of where the water table was. And I needed someone that knew that. I didn't know it. And lo and behold, Mr. Fox over there was leading state engineer. So I was able to hire him just to help me understand the connection between the river and the aquifer. All of those things came because 20 years before that, we were in flood. You all were getting 4 and 5 acre feet of water. There was so much water wasted going down the river because we didn't know how to capture it. We didn't know anything about it. So when the drought came, my attention went back to, okay, what do I do to capture monsoon events? What do I do to capture snow runoffs? Monsoon runoff. So that's where I got into the idea of let's try to capture it, build the infrastructure, put it in a drain and let the drain soak it into the aquifer. So that's what we're doing now. So everything that I've done for my 40 years is basically either being in the right place at the right time, having to deal with the transition like EBID taking over from the Bureau, ending the El Paso case and getting right back into another law case, like John said. I don't think there's been a year that I've been here that we haven't been in a lawsuit.
Sure.
When you're dealing with water, you gotta be able to protect it. And ever since the board decided to hire way back when I started, with the district to defend ourselves against El Paso, that law firm has to evolve and just move forward. And it's been that same law firm, really. The bloodline goes back to them, and out of that bloodline, we've got our present lawyer. But I'm telling you that our legal battles will not end. They're not even close to ending. Everybody's looking at what we've got. And yeah, we may have given some up, but what did we get in return? We at least have an operating agreement that works right now. Can it be changed? Will it be adjusted? I don't know. That's a New Mexico versus Texas deal in Supreme Court. But my point, I guess, in all of this is that I learned my job from just getting my feet wet, getting out in the field, learning what the farmer needed. I still take the calls that I've got it a little different. You contact the manager. Anybody can contact me, from the smallest farmer to the largest farmer, and give me their issue. Either I call them back. If I don't call them back, I get Joe or a staff member to call them so that they get an answer. And so, yeah, over time you learn that you can't be everywhere. And certainly you have to make a decision, the priority. What are you gonna do at that moment in time? You stay behind because you have flooding in Hatch, or do you go to some conference in, DC? Me, I'll stay here. That's where I need to be. I don't need to be at that conference. I can go another time. I want to be where I need to be, and where I need to be is here at the district. So I make that call. Sometimes I ask the board, for permission to travel, but if something comes up, I can't go, I don't go. Because I know I have to be here. There's something more important. Whether it's a construction job and we have a board that we have to make, and do I make a decision to bring in overtime? Or try to get the report done while everybody's working? My men call me, my staff calls me and says, Gary, I don't know if I can make the board without having overtime. How many men do you need? Give me 3 men. I'll agree with him based upon his decision. And we'll get the report done. But those are the kind of things that I still involved in on the daily thing, but at the same time, I'm dealing with a sewage leak. Okay, that just popped up. Didn't know it was there. Preston didn't know it was there, but it was there. So I had to focus my attention on that. So that's what a manager does. He takes the time to look at the situation, understand what's more important. And so basically, that's hard to find a person like that on the street. And Chris is right. You know, maybe you can find that skill level as an irrigation manager or someplace else. But every one of my staff has a good, I can leave and go to a conference knowing that the district is taken care of. And if there's a farmer that needs something or an operation issue or a financial issue, I have staff to cover that stuff. And they can get it done. So it's, again, the team effort. You've got to have a team, so that manager has to have the trust of the employees that work for him. And then he's got to be able to trust them and delegate the authority. You probably have your best tractor drivers that you trust, that you know you need them on that tractor for that job. Same, I have people that work for me that I can trust. If I ask Eric, I need to know something about what's happening in the groundwater this year, I can call him and he'll give me the answer I need to see. But those are trust things that come in as a manager, is having a team. It's not, it's, if you can find the manager, and the manager find the people and work with the people. But that's the next thing that Chris said, is people skills. You gotta have that person that can do that. And that's what I do. But it's evolved over time. It just, things fall in your lap, you gotta deal with it. Just like a farmer has to deal with things on the farm. You have to make those judgment calls, and you have to know in your heart and your mind and conscience what you should do to do your job.
Thank you, Mr. Esslinger. I'm gonna ask you a focused question. One of the things the board is trying to weigh here is the role of the future manager. Things we've discussed today is whether it's an operational role or whether it is an external relationships role. Or whether both of those things all slam together and it's all of them. What would your advice to the board be about choosing that role? Which one do you think is most appropriate for the board to be looking for?
Based on what's coming down the road, my vision of what I see and what I think this district needs, you need to have both. You need to have the man that can go to the Bureau and go with NIFWIF, this National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and understand that they have an appropriation of funds that you can get. You cannot understand that unless you deal with those people every day. And once you deal with those people and they can say, okay, here's your check, then I have to deal with the people, well, where's the best place to put that money in this district? Do you pipe canals? Do you line canals? Do you make the system more efficient? So that person has to understand what you need in the district to become more efficient with moving your water, your conservation of water. You have to understand that the environment is challenging you, whether it's endangered species, clean water, whatever that's out there. You learn that from these national meetings. You learn it from reading federal law that's in place, Clean Water Act, lawsuits that are in place, Glacier lawsuit. What is that? It's a groundwater contaminant lawsuit, that if we lose that, farmers could lose the ability to just drain their water into the drains, runoff off of fields. It could hurt, harm us. You gotta know something about that. You gotta have a legal team that keeps you up to speed on what that means. You also, you also have to know that if you're gonna get a funding, contribution to your district, you just need to know where you need to put it. Do you put it in flood control, watershed improvement? Do you put it in piping your canals to make them more efficient? Because once you pipe a canal, you have no more weed control, no more maintenance. You can automate, then you begin to think about automation. Why do I know these things? Because Chris Polly invited me and Robert Fabian to go to Australia, where I saw this stuff on the ground happening. Automated. Large store, there are canals where there's storage facilities. It wasn't the bio, it was in their canals. And then as soon as, and the automation just open and close the gates, delivered the water to the farmer. All automated gates, everything. The labor force goes down. Your technical people go up, but the labor force running water, maintaining ditches goes down. Because you don't need them. It's piped, covered up, maintained, channelized, concrete line. And so these are all the things that you learn as a manager when you go visit with other managers and see other irrigation districts. So, yeah, those are the kind of things that I asked the board if I could go, and they allowed me to go. And what did I do? I brought back that technology, Rubicon, automated gates. Some of you may have seen them, okay? They've already been here. They put one of their products in one of our headings. It was about a $40,000 product. Our own people did it for about 10. So these are the things you learn, but then you bring them back and you get the ideas from your engineering department, your technical people that understand what all that means. I don't need to know the detail. I leave it to other people.
So, we've been discussing, ops management versus external management. And so if I understand your answer is don't split them, put all of those roles into one position.
Right now.
Thank you. Other comments? So I will mention, that is not what I've heard from the board. So Mr. Esslinger's recommendation is separate from what I'm hearing from Mr. Colquitt, where he said he needs to be in the district and it's on the ground. This individual needs to be focusing on operations. So, comments from the board. Just Mr. Glacier.
I very much agree with Mr. Esslinger. You gotta cover both bases.
Mr. Colquitt.
So my question to Chris, can we get both?
Yeah.
Have our cake and eat it too?
Every manager's like that.
Let's do it.
Yeah, every
Simple.
manager's like that. No. Which is harder to learn? Obviously, the operations, that's hard.
Sure.
Government relations stuff, that's easy. If you have a person who's willing to do it, it's good. No. Your priority is always gonna be the floods, it's always gonna be operations, it's always gonna be the broken canal, that's, that's good. But every manager does both.
One thing to remember, and probably we have over time, and there's probably people listening to this, but the Bureau and EBID were far apart at one time when we took over. But I have to say today, we were probably the closest we've ever been. The Bureau knows what we need to do. And they understand our role. We are still a Bureau project. We need the Bureau here. We still have questions of what the state engineer would want to do down here. And we're challenged there in stream adjudication cases and everything else. But for right now, I say our relationship with the Bureau is probably one of the best it's ever been. From the field office in El Paso. Staff works well with James Narvaez, to the area manager, Jennifer Bader, all the way to Utah, where the regional office is. And then all the way to DC, where people, when you walk into the Department of Interior building and meet with the Bureau, they they welcome you there. Chris will vouch for that. They know who we are. They know who we are.
Other comments from the board? Mr. Sloan?
I was just gonna see, has everybody kind of a chance to read this district manager page?
The general summary,
I mean, I guess I kind of read through it. I mean, for me, seems pretty, for me, I mean, I think this would be a pretty good place to start. I don't know how everybody else feels.
We have a suggestion from Mr. Sloan that, so this is the page that they define the position for their manager search. A suggestion from Mr. Sloan that that's the starting point for our discussion. Mr. Rosa.
Mr. President, I think if we look for somebody that came up through operations, but that does have the skills to, work outside relationships. I think if we hire them first, then we can see if we need any additional help anywhere else, knowing that they can fulfill the role.
Other comments? I will simply state, I continue to disagree. It will not be the first time that I have a lone different viewpoint. I think the roles need to be separated. That said, if there is their dissent other than my own, then starting with this as a basis for defining the role of the manager search, Mr. Rosa.
Mr. President, I don't mean to send out, I'm just reiterating that if we have somebody that can do both roles, we can split them in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Rosa. Very good. Mr. Pauly. Have you distilled enough from this conversation to help define the role for our manager search?
I think so, and I appreciate all the board's comments, all very helpful. And what I will do is I will use a job description as provided to me by Mr. Estinger. And I will use this, I will put the two together, and then I'll work with you, Mr. Gagne, for your designee.
We're probably gonna choose a different point of contact other than me, just because my roles are full. And so I'll turn to the board for that in a moment.
Okay, that's fine. Then I'll work with someone here on the board. We will wordsmith it, see where the board likes, and then upon final approval of the board, then that would be the KID or the EBID version of this that we would circulate, if that's agreeable.
So, in the interim periods between board meetings and the board getting a report on progress, Mr. Pauly has requested for a point of contact with the district to include the district manager and one member of governance. I would ask the board who they would like that to be, and I'm going to decline to take the role simply because I have other duties. And we should be splitting those up. Mr. Clayshaw.
Vice President.
So Mr. Rosa already chaired a couple committees. That said, Mr. Rosa, your thoughts?
I will take the role if that's what the board wishes.
So is there anyone else desiring to serve in this POC role? Again, I will state, executing this role looks a lot like work. There will be quite a bit of work to do in between board meetings in coordinating this process. So I will simply state that I will be looking to other board members to help lighten Mr. Rosa's role in his other committee assignments so that he can focus on this one, at least during the term between now and interviews. Because I'm expecting it will be busy. Mr. Sloan.
I guess I was just looking at these bullet points of his agenda. I guess the questions, is that something between Chris and Raphael, or should we discuss any questions right now?
I think we're probably too early to get into the questions process.
I would say let's, we can do this. I mean, if the questions, that's a big thing. If there are specific questions you want to ask, yes, we want those. And we'll add those to a list, you know, because the questions have to be tailored to this organization. Have to be tailored to this organization. But the important thing about the questions is that they're the same for everybody. Everyone has them at the same time. Right? So either we catch everyone cold or everyone's prepared, but everyone has to be treated the same. And then, of course, your questions for your internal candidates will be necessarily different from your external candidates, just based on familiarity. Sure.
Should we address that right now? Do we need to, like, as far as internal candidates versus external, should we address that right now? Or do we want them to go ahead and just, they would get an interview process?
We can. It is beyond the scope of what I was intending for today's meeting on this, but we can if you would like.
Well, I assume Chris will not be back.
Most of Chris's interaction with us is going to be.
So this is a pretty nice time right now. to have him right
If
first.
there's one right in front of us,
Yeah.
yes. So, I like the idea of unified questions. I have not had enough time to study the internal versus the external questions to understand why we would want to question internal candidates differently than external candidates.
But would you give an internal candidate automatically they're gonna be interviewed?
Oh, no, I like that idea.
That's what I'm saying. Like he said that they were not gonna get like sorted basically. If you were internally and you applied, you were gonna get interviewed.
If you were an internal candidate, yes. I would say we might have to reconsider that if we got 30 people from the staff at EBID applying, we might need some sort of a filter. I would not expect that to be the case. But aside from that, I think it is important. I think there's some important things that come from interviewing internal candidates, whether they're selected or not, that helps inform the board's decision on selecting a manager. So I think it's a good idea. I don't have anything negative to say about it. Other comments from the board? Is there anyone that's concerned about granting an interview to every internal candidate that applies? I'm hearing none. Other items, Mr. Colquitt?
So what is the entire unanimous board's view of what the manager should do? Because we're kind of at a crossroads, right? Some people say local, some people say national. What are we doing as a whole?
You mean for the candidate pool?
No, the managers.
Oh,
You know, because we haven't really defined it, right?
So what I heard,
Mhm.
this description encompasses both roles.
Which I'm good with, but is everyone good with?
So the only dissent I heard was my own. Is there other dissent? So I'm still not hearing any, so I would suggest that's consensus.
Sure.
I don't think that we, at this point, just giving Mr. Pauly direction, I don't think we need motions and votes on it. Mr. Garai.
Well, what kind of filter are we gonna use? Are you gonna use years of experience? I mean, we don't want everybody applying for the job. Are we gonna set the parameters?
So
On the second page,
Thank you.
it says, if you look at the second page, what do you feel about that?
Yeah.
That would be.
You're looking at the general fund.
Experience education.
Mr. Roby Rosa.
President, I would suggest that, the board individually review this packet, over the course of the week, and then, we can ask for red lines or something to that effect.
So, I want to be a little cautious with that. What we're deciding to do here is a policy matter. And those reviews need to happen in an open meeting. the work that's delegated to you does not. So in that, if we have the board returning responses, that can potentially be considered a policymaking event.
Maybe a red line that is reviewed in an open meeting.
So then we don't need, they're not gonna get it to you during the week then?
No.
These are things that we're going to consider at the next meeting. And so in that, Mr. Pauly, our next board meeting is the second week in March. Is there additional information and guidance that we need to provide you and Mr. Roby Rosa now? Ahead of getting to that meeting. And by the way, I would expect that whatever you need us to review and redline would be presented to staff in enough time to put into our board packet.
No, sir, I think it's sufficient. I think this suggestion is a good one. Have the board members, consider this individually and then discuss it in the open meeting, next board meeting, for a fully informed and open public discussion. I think this is an excellent starting point, and this is a good path forward, but the path has to be yours. So whether it's 15 years or 10 years, decide that, and you can discuss that next week.
Thank you, Mr. Pauly.
Haven't we discussed this?
So specifically what we're discussing is the role of manager. So they're asking the qualifications for a candidate.
Haven't we discussed that?
The qualifications for a candidate, I would suggest we have not.
No, I think he's mentioning legal and consulting when we talked about the years of experience for the outside consulting.
So maybe that's what it was.
Okay. Mr. Sloan,
Should we discuss hiring timeframe for us personally? I mean, I was just making some notes here. I don't know for Mr. Polly, like what you feel like, I mean, I know your publication comes out monthly,
It does.
so I don't know, would it be like for this posting, would it be for the March issue? Would it be an April
We're
issue?
always about 30 days ahead.
Okay.
And of course, we're gonna move at the speed of light here.
Uh-huh.
So, once you decide this, then we do the ads and so forth. So we'll catch up. I think what would be most helpful is just a general consensus of the board that you're not gonna be trying to do this next month.
Right.
That you have a longer view, possibly like we talked about, or I suggested, we want to do interviews August, September, something like that.
My only thought was, I don't know if
Consensus of the board.
my only thought is, I don't know, let's say a candidate person, might have children or something like that, and you're looking at schools and things,
Yeah.
moving families. I mean, I was just kind of thinking more if we had somebody, if we were doing the interviews by August or try to have our list of candidates by July, I don't know if that's reasonable or.
So I can give you my quick thought on that. Looking at the timeline, looking at publication deadlines for Mr. Pauly's magazine as well as other places we'll publish, I would expect if we move quickly and we're approving these sorts of things in our March meeting, we're looking at the May timeframe that this is public and out. Am I close, Mr. Pauly?
No, that's
And that's moving rapidly, with the expectation then that there is, 2 to 3 months of publication before our submission deadline, which puts us into that August to September timeframe for considering candidates. I'm gonna suggest to you that's moving rapidly.
Well, and that's something I've experienced. I have nothing, I don't know anything about it. When jobs posted, how quickly a guy who wants to apply for this job sits on the sideline before he applies. I don't know if 60 days is a reasonable amount of time where people, if they want to search for a different job, are they gonna go ahead and put their application in? I don't really know that question, I guess. So,
for this level, yes.
60 days is.
Well, keep in mind, whoever's gonna apply for this, they're more likely working for another district, and they're gonna be in the full throes of the water. They're not gonna apply for a job and leave in 2 weeks.
Right.
It's a different view. And so there's a longer horizon for that type of person. Getting back to the KID reference example, they started about this time of year, they stopped accepting applications in August, they interviewed in September, and their guy started in January. So there's a long trajectory there. And now there's going to be an overlap of 6 months until July. And then who knows, if there's gonna be another overlap after that of a different level. So, it's a big job. It's important to be thoughtful and to provide as much time. I understand you're thinking about school and so forth. It's a big consideration, it is. But I would say, give yourself enough time to advertise it and get the right people.
Any final items? All right, hearing none, I have, Mr. Pauly has a tight schedule to keep. I have one item that is timely and needs to come up to the board that they need to discuss in closed session. So we're going to take a short closed session and then come back to finish our agenda. If I have a motion to go into closed session.
You go into closed session.
I have a motion from Mr. Rosenrose to go into closed session, seconded by Mr. Garai.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Please, Mr. Luce.
President, what is the topic for which closed session is going into on a very broad level in terms of the open meetings?
The topic is a strategy point from our lobbyist while he's present.
Would the president believe that is related to an administrative adjudicatory proceeding?
No. I would suggest it is of an emergency matter.
Mr. President, may I?
Please.
Mr. Lutz, I believe what Mr. President is referring to is something related to ongoing litigation. If I understand what is going on based on my conversation with Gary and Chris yesterday. If I'm off the mark though, Mr. President, please correct me. Otherwise, I would allow this, Mr. Lutz, in closed session under Texas versus New Mexico.
So it would be pending and threatened litigation, is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. That's it, continue. I would make that part of the motion.
Thank you very much. So if I understand that as a friendly amendment, you move to go into closed session to discuss pending litigation in Texas v. New Mexico?
That's correct.
That's the motion, seconded by Mr. Garai. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? To the chair, the ayes have it, motion carries. If you are a member of the public, we will be coming back to open session shortly. If you would simply. Thank you all for your patience. We are back in open session. I will note that no motions or actions were taken. We discussed only the item included in the motion. Back to our open session agenda. First, I would like to thank Mr. Pauly for his time today. I would like to thank him for coming to our district to meet with us personally. And I look forward to the results that you and this board will create to help lead our district into the future. Thank you again, Mr. Pauly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, board.
Next item on the agenda is general discussion on board meeting process and board of director input. So this and the next item are agenda items that I requested while we are together. I wanted to give Mr. Lutz an opportunity to address some things with the board, and this was the first one. So, Mr. Lutz.
And this derived from a short discussion we had at the last meeting where just a request from some directors was made to talk about the meeting process, and specifically with an eye towards open meeting and closed meetings, sometimes rules of order. I try to be brief. It's an attempt to go through the basics at a high level, so I apologize to people that have been on boards or have been on this board for a long time. And of course, interrupt, would you like me here or would you like me in the center? What is the preference? Of the board?
Again, I don't have a preference. Any board members prefer Mr. Lutz to move? Please
Okay,
continue where you're at. I think it's a little easier for folks to see us on the owl as well.
one thing to take into account, your general statutory directive as a board of directors is set forth in the New Mexico statutes. There's one specifically that talks about the board of directors and its powers. It's 73-914. The board shall have the power and it shall be their duty to adopt the seal, manage and conduct the affairs and business of the district. make and execute all necessary contracts, employ such agents, attorneys, officers, and employees as may be required and prescribe their duties. Establish equitable rules and regulations for the distribution and use of water among the owners of said land, generally perform all such acts as shall be necessary to fully carry out purposes of this act. The statute is very lengthy beyond that on some specific item that I did not plan for time purposes to go into, but that's the opening sentence and the general provision of what this board does. Of course, it has regular monthly meetings as part of that. My understanding is Elton Beauty Irrigation District does not have bylaws. The board meetings are run generally pursuant to Robert's Rules of Order. I don't know if that's actually set down in stone, but that appears to be the direction that all people seem to follow. As to that, of course, the board president, Mr. Davier, usually runs the meeting. Action items are brought before and considered by the board by motion. In terms of obtaining the floor, any director desiring to speak tends to address the board president, and upon recognition by the board president, addresses the subject under consideration. One question I had, Mr. President, some boards are different on whether the president can actually make a motion. What has been your experience?
So it has been my experience on this board that the president makes no motions, votes only when needed to break a tie. And that has been by custom, that it's not. I have not seen that written in any of our policies.
Otherwise, as you've seen from, what you've worked on and the meetings you've attended, any other director may make a motion, the motion must receive a second. If successfully seconded, the board president asks for further comment. Board members may ask at some point that further discussion can be suspended, calling for a vote. Some people call that calling the question. Secondary motions that can occur. Motions to amend, you hear a great deal, and this is where it can be confusing because motions to amend are usually resolved before the motion itself. And you start to get 3 or 4 layers of emotion sometimes, and that's just how naturally things progress. That the concept of a friendly amendment is sometimes introduced to prevent that kind of practical logjam that can occur. Friendly amendments actually, Robert Rules of Order is a little cool on the concept of a friendly amendment, but as a practical matter, boards employ that concept to try to move things along, which I'm sure everyone wants me to do. You can move to table with a secondary motion. Main motion may be tabled to a date certain or indefinitely tabled before it is voted on by a motion made to table. That is typically where, lack of a better term, it's left for another day. And the discussion is had and the action item is resolved at all at another meeting. You can move to refer to committee. Yes, sir.
So, move to table, that would be, you would already have a motion. The first
Yes.
initial motion made. And there would be a second.
There would be a motion and a second. And as you're involved in discussion of that motion, someone can file a secondary motion to table that.
And that would also need a second.
That would need a second.
And then would it be discussed as well?
It would be discussed as well.
I believe motion to table is not a discussable motion, not
Oh,
debatable.
okay.
I'd have to look
I'll
at
double
it,
check that.
but there are certain motions that are non-debatable.
So that if that was voted on, move the table, the first motion would not have to be revisited.
If the motion to table was granted, the main motion was essentially denied as moot, as we say in the legal world, subject to being repicked up at a later time.
The vote fails it from continuing discussion, right? Am I right, Mr. Love? I could be wrong. But that's what I thought a table was to do, is to stop discussion, move it on, but if it fails, then you go back to discussion.
So
And I'm not.
again, a matter of custom,
That's how we did it.
I differentiate between a motion to table and a motion to postpone. Motion to table
says that the motion is still live, but we will act on it later in the meeting out of order.
Yes.
Okay, so the same day.
Correct. A motion to postpone pushes it to generally a date certain.
And, Mrs. Salpeck has commented to me that a motion to table is non-debatable. So,
So, yeah, the motions to end debate are generally non-debatable, you know, for good reason. A motion to simply end debate and vote on the motion requires 2/3. The motions to table and postpone require a majority. I believe, I would look them up and verify that if it ever.
We're right on the 2/3.
you can move to refer to committee. You know, you have subcommittees on a number of areas, some of which I know about, some of which I don't, just because of the time I've been here. That is another secondary motion that can be brought. Is you could have whatever finance committee, et cetera, review the question for the board. There is a process by which amendment of rules of order can occur. It is exceedingly rare, whereby you can suspend the rules of order and go a different direction. I've actually, in my experience, never seen a board do that because I would consider it to be controversial, but it is allowed. And of course, at the close of the meeting, you move to adjourn. Now, because Elephant Butte Irrigation District is, has a governmental component and is subject to the Open Meetings Act, the Open Meetings Act factors heavily with respect to how meetings are conducted. The main thing in terms of meetings and agenda in open meetings is the board president said at our last meeting that the goal generally of the statute is to try to make things as open and transparent as possible with limited exception. And the exceptions are specifically spelled out. And in the vein of doing that, leading up to a meeting, certain parameters have to be followed. Agenda items, there is a 72-hour requirement for agenda items for any kind of regularly scheduled meeting, which is a discussion we have on a regular basis, and probably everyone that's been on the board has dealt with many, many times. Special meetings may be called by a majority of members on 3 days' notice. Again, 72 hours, it would require, if I have my numbers right, 5 for a special meeting. Emergency meetings can be called, but they have to be called under specific parameters of the statute. And the statutory definition is if immediate action is required to protect the health, safety, and property of citizens, or to protect the public body from substantial financial loss. The same viewpoint I take if there is an agenda item that was not properly noticed that becomes an emergency. There needs to be an announcement that those statutory parameters met. So if we're in a meeting, a regular meeting, and some kind of emergency has come up the day before or 2 days before that needs to be addressed, there needs to be a specific discussion of how it meets that statutory standard. If action is taken on an emergency meeting that does not follow the 72-hour notice requirement, the Attorney General's office has to be notified within 10 days of what that action is by statute. So those are things to keep in mind in terms of how meetings are formed, what types of items are discussed at the meetings in terms of properly having them on the agenda. So I believe directors, I don't know the practical way, do they contact you if they want to?
So for having an item put on the agenda, any board member can request it. It has to be within the notice period. And as a practical matter, what I've suggested ahead of having this actually in policy is if you have an agenda item that requires no interaction from staff, it could be a committee report. You want to give a committee report, so you're not asking anything from staff. 96 hours ahead. because they need at least 24 hours to actually do the process of getting it onto the posted agenda. If it requires any interaction from staff, I would suggest it is the regular board meeting prior. That they need at least 30 days to be able to get the information you're requesting, provide the presentation that you need for your agenda item. So those are practical matters. They are the requests of the president of the directors. Per the Open Meetings Act, you cannot add an agenda item within 72 hours of the board meeting. Staff can't do it either. The agenda is set 72 hours out. Is that clear, Mr. Lutz? And and when I suggested that previously, there has not been any dissent from the board on that. At some point in time, we will have the board rules committee put into policy these items that we have informally followed by custom.
And my understanding is that motions to postpone do occur to allow staff, for example, to review items sometimes.
That's correct.
That is-
Motions to postpone have occurred for numerous reasons at the will of the board.
And I would say on emergencies, understand that the statutory standard is meant to be very, very limited. It needs to be a true emergency. It can't just be convenience related and try to shoehorn it in. So, because the Attorney General's office has that power to look over it, and they will have great concerns if they do. In terms of closed meetings, as you've seen, closed meetings must be made by motion. The reason, for example, the motion we had here, the reason I asked is we need to make sure in making the motion that it describes the specific area in which the closed meeting will be done. In the practice of this board, that is usually placed on the agenda. So it's already kind of a given if it's the standard closed session that's already been noticed to the public. That's what is going to be discussed. The statute is very specific on the items that can be discussed in closed sessions. Meetings pertaining to issuance, suspension, renewal, or revocation of a license. And they're thinking that vein, a government license could be anything licensed to drive, but Elephant Butte, I know, has its own adjudicatory proceedings that sometimes come into play. Those are usually, where they have to be in open session for certain aspects of that. Limited personnel matters. That is defined as the discussion of hiring, promotion, demotion, dismissal, assignment, or resignation of, or the investigation or consideration of complaints or charges against any individual public employee, provided it is not to be construed as to exempt final actions on personnel from being taken at open public meetings, nor does it preclude an aggrieved public employee from demanding a public hearing. That is one that I believe probably comes up every once in a while. And contractors are not public employees, I understand. The distinction between a contract, I am under a contract person. If you want to terminate my contract, it should be in an open session. It should not be a closed meeting discussion. Deliberations by a public body in connection with an administrative adjudicatory proceeding. Sometimes it is difficult to distinguish between formal litigation and an administrative adjudicatory proceeding. Essentially that's a kind of court proceeding, basically a quasi-judicial proceeding in front of an administrative body, which this organization, I believe, deals with quite often. It is related to the idea of a closed session for threatened or pending litigation, which is very standard and almost every month this board will have closed meetings. The discussion of personally identifiable information about any individual student is not applicable. There are a number that aren't applicable here. Meetings for discussion of bargaining strategy, preliminary collective bargaining negotiations. Mr. Colley said, I don't believe there's a union component relevant view, so that there are some irrigation districts where that might be applicable. I don't believe it would be applicable to this. The portion of meetings at which a decision concerning purchases in an amount exceeding $2,500 that can be made from only one source is discussed. And that portion of meetings at which the context of competitive steel proposals solicited pursuant to the procurement code are discussed during the contract negotiation process. The actual approval of purchase of the item or final action regarding the selection of a contractor shall be made in an open meeting. So there are some procurement related areas that can be discussed in closed meeting. Meetings for the discussion of the purchase, acquisition, or disposal of real property or water rights by the public body, and something that could come up. There are two others that deal with issues that will not be involved. Portions of meetings of committee or boards of public hospitals, gaming control board that have no relevance here. If a meeting is closed during an open meeting, the closure has to be approved by a majority vote of the quorum. The authority for the closed meeting and the subjects to be discussed shall be stated with reasonable specificity in the motion to close. Only those subjects specified in the motion may be discussed in the closed meeting. And that's important to make sure that the topics in closed meetings stay within the parameters of what the statute allows. Any action taken as a result of discussion shall be made by the vote in the open public meeting. Now, a lot of what you can tell I'm reading is from the Attorney General's resource. You can look it up online. It's about 30 to 35 pages. It is very good. It's been revised over the years. It has specific types of examples in discussing how a board operates. What they're trying to avoid, and this is the legal concept that I'll share with you, is what is called a rolling quorum. A rolling quorum is a situation where a majority of this board is interacting, meeting outside the context of an open meeting. So at times you will actually see a notice of a meeting. I think there's a discussion of a meeting in El Paso in April. Because a majority of the board may be there, it will potentially be noticed. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's going to be more than 5 there. So that the public knows that more than 5 people are going to be there. A decision made outside the context of an open meeting by a majority of individuals is illegal under the Open Meetings Act. How can that manifest itself? The one that scares a lot of people in my position is emails to the whole board. Someone emails, the board meeting will be, next Wednesday at 9 a.m. Here's the agenda. Someone hits reply all and says, hey, here's what I think of this issue. You are in a rolling quorum situation according to the Foundation for Open Government and the Attorney General. And something that seems, you have no intent whatsoever to do anything wrong. You just hit reply all and said something. You're suddenly in that situation. What are the penalties? Penalties for any violation of the Open Meetings Act. First, any action taken is void. That's the basic penalty. It is considered a criminal misdemeanor to violate the Open Meetings Act. It is very rarely enforced, but it has been. And our firm defended members of the Las Cruces Public School Board that were accused of a rolling quorum that went to trial in Alamogordo in 2002. One of the strangest trials I've ever been involved in. In that trial, the Attorney General's manual needed revision. What our clients had done was actually consistent with what the Attorney General manual said they could do. The Attorney General brought charges anyway, and then revised their manual. The judge instructed the jury in such a way that it made a conviction almost guaranteed. When the jury came back in Alamogordo, the jury foreperson stood up and said, "We've reached a verdict." And he said, what is your verdict? Well, he said, well, I want to say something first. The judge said, no, you just tell me your verdict. He said, well, I'm gonna say it anyway. We don't think they did anything wrong here, but he gave us no choice but to find them guilty. The judge fined them $500. Our client was looking at an appeal. It would cost $5,000 and just said, you know, I'll pay it, I'll call it. But what that came from was dissension on the board, and the school board was lax in its practices. Okay, I've talked a lot, I've thrown a lot. Any questions on?
Questions from the board. So we've discussed the Open Meetings Act. We've discussed a little bit about the statute that gives us our authorities and the way we are by custom running our board meetings. Questions from Mr. Lutz? So this discussion comes from questions from board members about, I want to understand my role better as an elected public official.
Am I meeting the expectations of the board members that were?
I think, and this may not be, I like, so we're all on the committee. You know, we're all in different committees. In that committee, a little bit of clarification, I think for a lot of us, there may be committees that have no prior, I don't know exactly, but maybe some people that have zero experience inside of a committee. What rules apply to a committee, I guess, or like, or how would that work, Gregor? Maybe you can clarify.
So I'm gonna give some customs, but I would. So the custom would be that the committee's discussion is bound by whatever's been relegated to them from the board as a committee. The committee does not make decisions with the authority of the board. The committee's role is to do the work needed to filter through the information and then come back to the board with a recommendation. The idea there is the committee spends 6 hours discussing something, and as a board, we're able to distill it in 20 or 30 minutes. We have. Now, I think that well sums up the way we've operated committees.
I think in terms of committees, I assume your committees are kept under 5 individuals.
That is correct. No committee operates with more than 4 presidents.
And the main thing is you need to keep that consistent such that you're not patching in other members of the board, either directly or indirectly. Working with them on the side so that you don't have a rolling barn situation. Committees can be very effective. You talked about a rules committee. What are your potential ambitions in terms of looking at that and perhaps formalizing some of these items?
So it's to get a discussion on how do we put into writing the process for selecting the board officers? How do we put into writing the roles and responsibilities of board officers that are outside the scope of the statute, which simply says the board shall select a president from amongst its members? How do we want the meetings run? How formally do we want to follow Robert's Rules of Order? How do we want to form committees? How many committees do we want to have? These are things that discuss how the board operates. That, in my opinion, would be better done if they were put in policy as opposed to being determined ad hoc based on who's the president today.
I would say if that's something you don't know, that is something I would certainly like to be involved in.
I suspect that we would include this, yes. Other board members with questions for Mr. Lutz? Mr. Esslinger?
In the past, we've utilized committees before, and at that point in time, the committee chair would contact me and request certain staff members that may be knowledgeable about that particular committee agenda item. And so that staff member would attend that committee meeting just to give briefings and updates or facts that they need. And is that permissible?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, and in fact, I think it would be encouraged. to use the resources that are available for any committees you might be on.
And I would go further to say, if you have a member of the public that you want to present to your committee, that is also permissible. The key point is that the committee cannot act on behalf of the board. The committee cannot constitute a board. Those are the key components. I missed something there, Mr. Lutz?
No, sir.
Thank you. Other questions? Is there anything else on this agenda item that you'd like to go over, Mr. Lutz?
Not at this time. I believe this was consistent with what was requested for me to go over. I think keep in mind for the future, a discussion of the Rules Committee, given that it is a very new board. If you have ideas on formalizing practices, moving forward with the meetings in any kind of different way, so long as it is consistent with the background legal requirements. It appears that is something that we're working together.
Mr. Roby Rosa.
Mr. President, Mr. Lutz, is there anything that, as board members in an open meeting that we should not bring up or discuss? Or any classes of topics that we should or shouldn't discuss?
I'm generally of the opinion that is a better practice. It's not set forth in the statute, I would say, that matters in related to personnel. For example, while I would say personnel matters, there may actually be some legal requirements. So when you're getting into the closed session areas, they're allowed to be in closed session for a reason. Now, for example, like attorney-client privilege, that is the client's privilege. I can't dictate to you not to disclose those things, but it is better practice in an organization to respect that privilege. So, I generally believe matters in closed session as much as possible should remain confidential as a practice. Legally, personnel is the one that comes to mind that we need to be very careful about disclosing in open session because it could affect the rights of the individual involved such that they could bring in claim under the Human Rights Act, for instance.
And we do have policy about how to handle privileged information. Policy of the board is in our board code of conduct. So we've discussed that in the past and we have policy on it.
Yeah, in terms of the code of conduct, if you have not reviewed it, I believe in 2018, there was a code of conduct passed. It largely relates to items that I think are analogous to the Government Conduct Act, related to, contracts or relationships with family members that are involved with the district. The draft I reviewed in preparing for this meeting is only about 6 pages or so. If you have not seen it, it is worthwhile review.
Other items on this topic? As you digest this, there may be additional items that you would like to ask Mr. Lutz to provide a presentation on at future board meetings. Please do, Mr. Lutz. I appreciate the short notice presentation of this. Bring us to our next agenda item, which is discussion regarding the current legal services contracts. Again, this is my agenda item. I asked Mr. Lutz to provide us some information on what an orderly transition will look like based on the fact that this board has directed staff to prepare an RFQ for a consultant to help review what our needs are for legal counsel, how to structure it with the expectation that we will go to an RFP process to select them. So the question would be, how do we transition from our existing contracts to those? And what does that look like in the judicial branch, given that we will always have pending cases?
Yes. And what I'd say on that is this, you need to look, and this is analogous to discussion that was had somewhat. I know it's a different situation, but the principles are similar to what you saw on the question of the lobbyist. There was some concern with the board about the time it took to potentially hire someone because the legislature was about to commence. What you need to reflect upon when we're looking at, specifically the legal service contract of Barncastle Law is that contract provides for a termination provision of 30 days. I think everyone on the board knows that. But when you're talking about an orderly legal transition, you have to think about the other component. Because the scope of work that I do is limited to non-water law related matters. Many of the litigation items are specifically water law related. Elephant Butte Irrigation District cannot represent itself in court by well-known case precedent. Organizations, entity, corporations, LLCs cannot represent themselves in court. So there is going to need to be another lawyer ready to step in. And the question is the timing of the replacement. And what is the process for that? Because inevitably that amount is going to exceed $60,000. That's going to need to go through the request for proposal process. And I may call on you a little bit, Mr. Franzoy, to talk about that as we go forward, but the board needs to think about in the transition, in terms of just timing alone, the mechanics of timing, what is the time it's going to take to have someone with the specialized knowledge to come in and comply with the procurement statute? And I think the decision, as to when, if otherwise to terminate a current contract in place has to take that into account. The procurement process on a request for proposal, there are many stages to that process. You have to prepare the request for proposal. You have to then publish it for a period of time and notice. The minimum amount of time by regulation is 20 days. The recommended amount of time by regulation is 30 days. Generally, the state thinks if it's a complicated matter, it should be more because you're trying to find the most number of qualified individuals to respond to the request for proposal so that this board can make the right choice. Then, of course, you have an evaluation period that has to go. You have to have a committee that evaluates it. You may have conferences associated with it. They have to examine when all the proposals are open and score those appropriately before that's even done. Mr. Brandvoigt, please jump in and tell me, what is your thought on timing just generally?
There's another few factors that play a role in this. You have to determine if the person or firm of hire is local, as in the state of New Mexico, or outside. There are provisions of that you have to deduct a certain percentage of their contract to make it more competitive, make local people more competitive in the market. If you're asking about timing to procure this specific contract, and are we talking about the legal consulting contract? Or are we talking about legal services?
I would suggest we're moving forward in time to assume we've had a consultant. We have a structure that this board has agreed upon, and they're putting out RFPs to build that structure.
I would say that depending on the candidates that qualify and how long we want to leave that open is going to be the biggest piece. Because we have to evaluate every single candidate based on the metrics that we develop. So I would suggest that this is something that warrants going above and beyond, as Mr. Lutz has suggested. And I would say that I would give it at least 45 to 60 days.
For the post, that's just the posting process.
That's just having the contract open for the bidding. Yes.
So,
Would you agree with that?
And would you say that the reason for that would be the challenge that exists in finding specialized qualified candidates that are not conflicted in a difficult way, because that is the challenge.
Yes.
There are only a limited number of firms locally and non-locally that have expertise in these areas of water law particularly. And Many of them already work for other organizations that in many respects may be adverse to this organization. That's been a problem, even finding non-water law. So,
And then in addition to that, I'll cut you off, sorry, Mr. Lee.
no, please do.
You also have to think, are we hiring a specific person or are we hiring a law firm with multiple lawyers in it? And do we need to interview the law firm, do site visits, multiple, or interview their, what you would consider subcontractors in procurement law? And then in addition, you'd have to review the whole client list, make sure there's no conflicts, look at their history. It depends on a lot of different things.
So I believe, Mr. Franzo, you're describing timing for the selection process. So we've discussed posting times and you were suggesting 45 to 60 days. Did I get those numbers right?
Depending on direction, right? I mean, if the board says we want to hire a law firm with 5 lawyers and we want to interview all those individual lawyers, if we want to, it depends on how we set the qualifications and evaluation process. I'll put it that way.
Okay. So we've got timing for posting process. So I believe you're then describing a selection process and all the various vetting that you need to do as a procurement officer in that selection process. So how much time do you think is involved in the scoring and selection process?
I think that could be relatively quick. I think
Which is
once you have all the documentation,
relatively quick as a month, relatively quick as a week.
I would say you could do that within a week. It just
Okay.
depends again, because that evaluation process, there's certain parameters that allow you to do site visits. For the person of hire, firm of hire, they have to list everybody who's gonna be working with them, who they might bring in on cases. So I guess it depends. But I would say that within a week, you can do it done.
And so then we also had in here the preparation of the RFP. So once this board has determined the structure they're looking for, what's a reasonable amount of time for you or staff to prepare the RFPs for that?
I could probably prepare the RFP within a few days. I think
All right,
that's the-
so a week is a reasonable time frame for that as well,
Yes.
but somewhere between 2 and 2.5 months for the procurement process. Once this board has given you direction on structure.
Correct. And then am I correct, the next part of the process would be for this board at a meeting to approve whatever recommendation is provided.
Absolutely.
That can be done through a special meeting process, or it can be done in a regular meeting, as long as the statutory structures just discussed are followed.
Thank you. And are there other questions about that part of the process? I have questions about the next step. So Mr. Luke's part that I don't understand, at some point in time, presumably, this board will determine the structure. We will send out RFPs, there will be selections for that. And then there's the transition of whatever components, whatever open litigation, whatever pieces is appropriate to then transition to other firms. What is that transition period? I don't have any idea how long that takes.
Well, what you want to avoid, and I'm just going to say, in the best interest of this organization, you do not want to have a gap in legal services. You don't want to have, and specifically thinking of litigation, you don't want to have a situation where, a current contract is terminated and a counsel of record has to withdraw. The general legal rule in New Mexico State Court is that organization will have 20 days from the order of withdrawal to supply new counsel. If they do not, and they are an organization, they run the risk of some kind of default remedy being entered against the organization. So the timeframe, realistically and practically, the question that needs to be addressed is should there be an overlap between whatever new contract might be entered into before the old contract finishes out by way of termination or otherwise, so that there can be a transition of working together to make sure the files are in good shape. Substitution of counsel is done instead of withdrawal of counsel. think that is a question the board should consider very seriously.
And so what is a practical timeframe for the transition if we're doing substitute accounts?
Well, my feeling is they should be working together for a period of time. And I think,
So that doesn't sound like 1 week, so,
it doesn't, and what I'm thinking, I'm sorry to speak over you.
yeah, it's all right, I'm
Yeah.
speaking over you, I don't quite understand what a period of time it
And
is.
what I'm thinking of is the list that was presented in December, as the new board members and myself were in attendance at the December meeting and heard what the current legal files are, and it was a very lengthy list. You know, my feeling is if someone is going to be taking over cases, they really would need 30 to 60 days to get up to speed because they are going to be juggling their own current case schedule to accommodate bringing on new casework and starting to build the relationships because you don't know when deadlines are going to come sometimes. And I'm thinking of that, while that may seem lengthy, it is a substantial list. Unfortunately, as has been said repeatedly, you are always going to be involved in litigation. It is just the nature of this organization and the market. Well,
Questions regarding that transition period for Mr. Lewis, Mr. Glacial?
30 to 60 days sounds awful short to me. 90 is more realistic.
I concur with that. Other questions or comments regarding the transition period?
Mr. President, we're just gonna speak.
Please go.
The other thing I'll just kind of make the board aware of is during my procurement for Mr. Lutz here, that you had a lot of lawyers with conflicts. You had a lot of lawyers who have too much workload who are withdrawing from bidding on that project or contract. So I just, make you guys aware that it's gonna be pretty difficult to find such a niche law firm locally who can take on those duties, who isn't conflicted out. That's all I'm just gonna make aware of there.
It's likely to be a difficult process. I
agree.
I have lived through the difficulties of working to bring in additional assistance in the area of legal services. Mr. Esslinger.
There was an offered new list, if you want to, look at this, of the pending
Oh.
matters and tasks.
I don't think it's necessary at the moment. They're extensive. Okay. We have the list. It's extensive. Mr. Glacial.
In working with the committee, also looking on my own, pretty much every good water attorney in this state of Colorado is already conflicted. I suspect we'll be going to another state to find anybody. There's not representatives, the quality of attorney we want.
It is a difficult problem to solve. It is not impossible. It's just difficult and it takes some time. Which brings me to my point. So we've now listed out time that's somewhere in the 5+ month category for this process to run its course. If we work with a sense of urgency. My big thing to note is, our current legal services contract with Barncastle Law expires in December, and it is not available for renewal. We can't simply say, well, we didn't quite get there, we'll just renew the contract. We must complete this process during this calendar year. And so it lends itself to the sense of urgency that we need from the committee that's doing the work to complete the tasking delegated to them from this board in a timely manner. I concur with Mr. Clayfield, 30 to 60 days, that, like, could you do it in that period of time? Appreciate the advice from Mr. Lutz that you could, and I concur with Mr. Clayfield that you probably shouldn't. You probably should have more time than that. That's a little longer than I was expecting. I will note that Mr. Lutz's contract has a cap as well. And so it just lends itself to the urgency of us doing our job as governors to make a decision so that we can get the process started. Other comments? Mr. Franzoy?
Sorry to bring this up as well, but based on what I've heard from the board, there's also the RFP for hiring the contractor / consultant to do the work, then doing the work layered in on addition to everything after that. So period of time is longer than what you're saying. Just about it.
We're with a lot in front of us. And I appreciate the fact that, the board has shown a sense of urgency in forming committees, starting the work, getting action started. I think it's important that we're realistic in the amount of time it takes as well, and that we don't lose sight of what we're up against in terms of the expiration of current contracts for legal services. With that, there are no other items on our agenda. Do you have anything you need to wrap up on that item, Mr. Lee?
No, sir.
Thank you. We do have some items to cover in closed session. I will accept a motion to go into closed session.
Can I make a comment
Please.
on that? In terms of preparing the closed session items that are listed, when Mr. Esslinger and I discussed the agenda items, there was a thought that we might leave open the possibility if we needed to discuss specific matters that are on the list of pending litigation. I don't believe, based on our discussion, that may be necessary at this point. So I would not have anything that I would be presenting with respect to setting the.
So am I hearing the suggestion that closed session further beyond this is unnecessary?
I don't have anything that I would need to present in closed session.
So.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Solopek, please.
I do have an update. I have not been able to give a closed session update in multiple months. I do have one for the board.
How much time do you need, Mrs. Solopek?
Not much. I'll keep it confined to Texas versus New Mexico.
Thank you very much. So we do have a closed session item to go over today. I will accept a motion to go into closed session. I have a motion from Mr. Garai to go into closed session. Seconded by Mr. Ludwig. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Any chair, the ayes have it. We are in closed session. Thank you, everybody, who attended the meeting today.